This is JCU Conversations, a podcast show from James Cook University, Singapore. Tune in as we ask experts in the industry more about their lives and their approach to success. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Let's listen to today's episode.
Hi, my name is Professor Jason Pomeroy, the founding principal of Pomeroy Studio and Pomeroy Academy. And welcome to JCU Conversations, an initiative by James Cook University, Singapore, where I get to chat with captains of industry about what makes them tick and what makes them the leaders that they are today. I'm delighted to be joined here today by Mark Wee, the Executive Director of DesignSingapore Council, a Singapore design agency that is really promoting those captains of design who are looking to make a difference in this urban habitat. Mark, I'm delighted to be here with you. Welcome.
Same. Thanks. Always good when we meet.
It's always good. It's always good. And we're in a perfect setting of the National Design Centre again. Wow. Let's start with your childhood. It sounds a bit like the psychologist couch, I know, but tell us a bit about your childhood.
Oh, to be honest, I had a good childhood. I had a really fun childhood. Most of my memory was probably out of school, out of the classroom, and really not what I was learning inside. But I remember kind of skateboarding, kind of like, going on adventures in drains and sort of like hanging out with a whole bunch of people. But basically, kind of a lot of improvisation and just learning how to play.
That's really nice.
And also kind of really appreciative on reflection that I had parents who basically didn't really pressure me very much. And I think a lot of that sort of I just take it as just gave me space to kind of just find myself and improvise and play, and maybe got me here today.
Well, you're an executive director of DesignSingapore Council, but you're more than that. I mean, you're more than just this catalyst. You're an architect, you're an artist, you're a designer, you're an educator. Tell us, first of all, what was your first job out of those many hats that you wear?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the way you describe it, I think it's true. I've always found it very hard to sort of describe myself. But I like I said, if I'm filling up an insurance form, I would say I'm an architect.
Okay.
Right. But my first job, as you know, as an architect, I worked in the architecture practice. Right. So after graduation, I came back. I mean, that was a long story. Never really planned to. I was hoping to kind of work in the States, but ended up coming here and worked for DP Architects for almost 5 years, and then got my practice and my license, and then I started the studio.
Interesting. So, as a fresh graduate architect, having cut your teeth in DP, working in Singapore, was there one sort of defining moment, one particular project that set you on course to be an architect, or was there a pivot point for you because of that one experience?
Oh yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, first, when I did architecture, architecture school for many, architecture school, education and practice are quite different, right? Yeah. Education is sort of brilliant. I mean, it sort of opens your mind. It kind of teaches you how to think, and in some ways, I think I felt that, the education allowed you to kind of create something out of nothing, right, conceptually. And then coming to practice, all of a sudden you're kind of faced with all this other stuff, code, right, like budgets, clients, and all these other requirements, but ultimately it's sort of necessary. So I think coming into practice, I was coming in always with a lot of other interested kind of topics, just not really sure how to bring it in, knowing at some point it would. But coming to practice, I sort of dove into it. And if I look back about sort of what was a kind of important project was, I think one of the last projects I did before I left DP was I did the Majestic Hotel. Oh. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure whether you recognize it. It's the old boutique hotel.
Beautiful.
Today it's kind of Mandala Club.
Yes.
Straits Clan. So I was, we designed the hotel, and it was obviously a great client. And, I think we won some awards for it. But what I took from it was being in that project that as an architect, you would be able to contribute at best spatially to the sort of like conceptualization and the kind of promise of the project. But there were so many other layers to what would make that business or that hotel work that, that I felt that, hey, wouldn't that be interesting to be able to kind of inform as well as a creative. Yeah.
So when I think about the Majestic Hotel, it's a heritage building.
Yes.
There are those layers of history, layers of artistic expression. Does that sort of appeal to your artistic sensibilities?
Absolutely. I mean, actually, if you recall the hotel, I mean, they had art pieces in every room.
Yeah.
So there was one art piece I did in one room. It's called the Singapore Room. So that was
I'll have to go.
mural that I did.
Yeah.
I worked at it for a week, and it endured for many years. So obviously there was one, but I think the other part about it was just this idea of being able to kind of create something that has all these layers that ultimately would sort of like, provide an experience, right, to a person. I think that was something coming in. I just felt that it was just a privilege to be able to do, right? Yeah.
So, artist first or architect first?
Next question. Yeah, I think you can't. Okay, so it's an interesting thing to break down, right? I don't think you can. It's hard to separate that. The artist is when you yourself bring a personal conviction around what you want to express. That's sort of hopefully unique to yourself, that you need to kind of own, protect, and in a way sort of be quite uncompromising about. And I think that's the role of an artist, or at least that is what great artists do. An architect sort of has to take into account all these other considerations, because ultimately you're servicing or you're providing a service to someone that would be responsible to ultimately create something that would work well for that client. And I think great projects have obviously that ability to sort of meet those needs and do them well, but express themselves in a sort of realm of sort of magic or beauty, and that's the artist, that sort of, is appreciated at an intangible level. So I think that's where the sort of connection comes.
So how many years were you practicing as an architect, and what was that departure point to then move on? Was artist your second calling, would you will?
Yeah. So I've always sort of understood myself as an artist, right? I mean, aside from making buildings and, I ran a practice also designing experiences for a long time, I have also always drawn and painted on the side, right? So I've always had these sort of three parallels in life. I think just publicly, it's just at different seasons, these things kind of become more prominent, right? So I think, what would I call myself first? Maybe I'll call myself an artist. Oh, Dan, it's hard. A creative or architect.
I didn't say this was going to be easy.
No. But you know what? I think somehow being comfortable with knowing when to use each term for the context is useful, because I also understand that these words actually come with a lot of connotation. Like if I say I'm an architect, in some ways people kind of box you as an architect. If I'm an artist, same. If I'm a designer, as a creative, people are like, what is that? So I struggle, right? But I also accept that actually, as a creative, through your life, that the beauty is being able to kind of just move into different phases where you get to do things in different realms.
Absolutely. I think we're increasingly seeing
Yeah.
crossovers, aren't we?
Absolutely.
I mean, we look at Thomas Heatherwick as a sculptor, artist who is increasingly entering into the architectural world. We even saw Panine Farina as the car designer entering into architecture.
Yeah.
So those means of blurring the boundaries between professions are increasingly being sought after. And I think that the general public like to see that.
Yeah.
I guess that lends me then to speak a bit more about your role as the executive director of Design Singapore. I mean, surely this must be a perfect platform then to see the molding of different professions, creative professions.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit more about your role as ED.
Okay. So, I would say I'm a public servant right now. I'm the executive director of Design Singapore Council. What is that? The council is really maybe simply put, it's maybe the National Agency for Design, but we oversee a few things, right? Our mission is to be able to shape Singapore in terms of its innovation economy and in terms of its lovability through design. Design being a very large word, but really we see design as a key enabler for driving innovation in business through a differentiated product or service. We all know the value of design. to obviously take care of the design industries and ensure their health and think about how they can kind of rise up and sort of just go beyond Singapore. And then also we look into the talent pipeline for the country. So we work with all the schools, and we have data around sort of where design is growing, the fields, the new fields, new jobs, new kind of skills. And then, we take a kind of strategic approach around how do we sort of like shape the talent pipeline for the designers coming out into the industry. And of course, we run the design center, like here, right? And we hold talks, conferences, exhibitions. There's a good one on Corbusier downstairs.
Oh,
right.
I saw the models downstairs. They were fantastic.
And then we run our design week, and we also give out the President's Design Award, right? So that's really the kind of highest design award in Singapore. So that's what we do. And as an executive director, I guess I oversee all of that. I think, people ask how I got this role. You don't really apply. I just was asked whether I wanted to take it up 4 years ago. But I think looking back, it's probably because of my diverse history and experience that kind of covered, architecture, experience design, service design, education, interior design, branding. There's a whole bunch of things that, then I was like, am I someone with a low attention span? But, it worked out because it just kind of allowed me to understand the breadth of what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you mentioned education. You are an educator. What role does education play within Design Council Singapore?
I think it's massive, right? One, I think the role of education in just educating first the public about what design is, I think really is a big part of what we do. And then we kind of break that down. Public, sort of even educating business leaders, and then educating even, you could say, educating the design educators, or even institutes of higher learning. So I think education is a big part. Why? Because I think the role of design has really expanded, right? The easy way we used to kind of explain was, in the past, design is sort of maybe a very clear vertical, right? Basically, people creating what you call things, which is products, images, which is, branding, graphic design, all that, or places, right? Spaces, the built environment. But now it's moving into the design of services and experiences that now so that's really expanded. It's also sort of comes and is associated with a certain kind of mindset. We hear about design thinking, this idea of a human-centric approach towards thinking about how you find opportunities for innovation, which now the business world is obviously, really kind of embracing as a mindset. So it's really all that. And if you look at the Danish design ladder, right? You just talk about an evolution of design being from an expression of form into now the designing and the shaping of systems, right? It's really quite different, and most people don't understand that.
So educating people about the value of design is an incredibly important task, so that we move away from the realms of something being quite whimsical and flighty. This is going to be another sort of tough question, Mark, but what do you qualify as good design then? And how do we champion good design?
I think, one, there's always going to be, we think about sort of how it's expressed. Clearly everyone sort of has personal preferences for language and how things look. And of course, there's probably some universal or maybe accepted view of what good design is from what it's from at a educational, or at least at a kind of historical level, what stands out and all that. But I think today, given we're in a sort of a world of sort of high awareness of climate change, a real need to drive sustainable development because of the way things are, there's a huge responsibility, I feel, for design to be, or good design to be something that is conscious and driving towards sustainable development in some way or form. So I think that is a new layer of responsibility that you can. So that's being, what for something you're going to put out as a product, what is the how much waste are you putting out into? Are you thinking about it of its circularity? To when you're thinking about anything, you almost have to think about what is the sustainable impact of this, or how are you serving its users. So I think that's a whole layer of responsibility now that was not so explicit before, and we've actually shown that. I mean, in 2018, we actually revamped our President Design Award criteria to actually award based on impact. And and I think that was a big kind of shift to the industry around, we would be recognizing projects that made an impact on society or the environment in some way.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
That's good to see. And so that leads me then on to the education side.
Yeah.
As an educator,
Yeah.
tell us a bit about your starting point as an educator, and where do you see Design Singapore Council being placed as a thought leader and educator within the broader setting?
That's a good one. I mean, why I would call myself an educator is interesting, especially given that I don't kind of hold like a full-time position in the college. I think it's something that's always sort of resonated with me. I think a few months ago, my mom kind of reminded me that, there are a number of teachers in our kind of family. Like my grandmother used to teach art and music, right? and home econs. And
so it's in the blood.
I think in some way, right? I do think my mom was a teacher at some point, and so on and so forth. I think we had some aunts who were even principals, so I was just reminded. But I think, I think there's something there that, was always maybe in the blood, right?
Yeah.
Or we just want to talk and tell people what to do.
Yeah.
But I think the role of education in Design Singapore, I think there's a few fronts there, right? One, I think this building and the content we put out online and what we initiated, that is public education. So I think we have a role to play, and a visible role that I think is very unique because we actually have a space to be able to kind of communicate that, right? And then we have channels like the Design Week and all that where we can communicate. Then in terms of education, with how we influence education, right? I think that's when our work on the talent development side and working with all the schools is pretty important. So 2 years ago, we just formed this thing called the Design Education Advisory Committee. And it was actually a sort of really pioneering kind of act where it brought together all the heads of the schools and all the heads of and key people in the industry first together to really kind of think about design and design education, and how did we as a community want to sort of forward that in Singapore. And that's really been kind of key. So we have a kind of influencing role in being able to kind of help shape maybe the future and the direction of education. And then, of course, we do a lot of education with business leaders. We do a lot of sort of like dinners and discussions and roundtables, because we want to be the ones, we have to be the kind of advocates to them to tell them what is the value of design. So I think we are constantly educating, you could say, and because I think we are evangelists.
I'd love to be a fly on the wall of one of those roundtable dinners. Who do you normally invite to those dinners?
I mean, we have, under one of our teams, we do a lot of executive engagement. Right. So I think on that front, often we are in contact with sort of business leaders who are interested in design. I mean, we do education on different levels, but I mean, for those who really are very keen and want, we kind of keep them close, and then we basically always update them about things that we're doing that they might find meaningful. And then, of course, we just kind of keep in touch and maybe just bring them together to meet other like-minded people. We also do have a loose community with a number of design leaders in Singapore, especially those who have moved to Singapore to work and helm maybe different positions in sort of multinational corporations, their design teams. So we've also felt a need to kind of build a community with them and also, kind of keep them in the loop of what we're doing.
So taking this off-piste a bit, and your reference to Le Corbusier downstairs, if you had your fantasy dinner party that you could bring various people together, who would be your kind of ideal people at your party?
it will be eclectic, right? I think I'll get George Lucas. Probably one Han Solo. Okay, this is the third and last Star Wars character. I would love the Mandalorian to come for dinner. I would like. I just watched The Devil Wears Prada. I would love Anne Hathaway. I think she's pretty good looking. I want Dick Lee.
Oh, yes. I'm just thinking that when you mention a film producer, director, the creator behind Star Wars, but also characters, Han Solo, bit of a rebel.
Only Han Solo as Harrison Ford. So basically it's Harrison Ford.
Oh, it's basically Harrison Ford.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to finish this. I have two comedians on my list. I want Robin Williams.
Okay.
Ronnie Cheng.
Okay.
And a musician, I want Miles Davis.
Uh-huh.
An artist, I want Ken Dunn. He's an old guy from Australia. And an architect, I want Carlos Capa.
Carlos Capa.
Yep.
Interestingly, that you're going to Venice for the Biennale, so
Yes.
you'll be able to get up close and personal to many of his works.
Yeah. I mean, I got to visit it when I was in college. Always loved this work. Yeah, I mean, there's a sort of like there's a mind to just a very unique detailing that just comes from a different place.
Very good.
Mm.
If you were to kind of project now where Design Singapore Council will be in the next 5-10 years, what is your roadmap? What is your vision for the design movement in Singapore? Is it to reinforce what is happening locally or in the ASEAN region, or do you have broader expectations to see Design Singapore Inc. being seen on a global stage?
Good question. So I think, I think we've in the last few years, we've actually created a number and launched a number of programs that we hope will institutionalize and probably shape the design industry as well. So that's one. Let me talk about that. And then later on about sort of that role about how we're shaping the Singapore design brand. So a few things we started. I think 2 years ago, we launched this thing called the Good Design Research Program. And it was really to give the opportunity for designers to embark on some research investigation on projects that would ultimately give them an insight or new knowledge into, how design could sort of make an impact in a positive way. And it's a very broad way, but we have a showcase downstairs and they yielded all sorts of interesting projects, people investigating into how do I design for the elderly better, to others who are looking into material innovation for the sustainable, to people rethinking how to make clothes so that, there's no waste. I mean, there's a whole broad range. So we hope that will institutionalize and basically shape a kind of, we feel that Singapore could be a design research hub, and where designers here as part of practice is normal to always be thinking about, how design can actually drive sustainable development, right? So I think that's something that we want to do. The other thing that we've done is we also sort of launched a program on the business value of design with McKinsey. And that's really kind of taking the design index that they have that's publicly available to actually help companies who want to use design as a differentiator provide a mirror to understanding how mature they are and how can they kind of rise in maturity. So hopefully that gives a sort of tangible sort of dimension to also how companies can move forward and really become design-centric. So I think that these are some kind of key things we're doing. The other thing on the community side, we started this thing called the School of X. I'm not sure whether you're familiar, but basically it's a kind of like nationwide sort of community design program where anyone could come together in teams and basically work on how to improve their neighborhoods. So that's also been launched. We started some launches in Telok Blangah and Queenstown last year, and you see more of it. We've trained about 1,000 people within a year. So I mean, these things we hope will institutionalize and actually shape culture, right? In business, in the design community, and even in the local, just as citizens, right? So these things, and I think part of the role in the council is you plan for the long game, right? Because these things are trying to shift culture. Then in terms of what our role is in terms of the Singapore design brand, how we position Singapore, where do I see the opportunities are. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, the world's sort of shifting focus, the drivers for growth is in Asia. We are really right in the center of it. And we're unique because as a city-state, we are actually we are diverse. We really have representatives from all of Asia. And we're the only global Asian city in the world. I mean, what do you mean by that? But really, right, where any Asian person could come into Singapore and just sort of fit right in. So I think it's from this place that we can project something. I think I'm always sort of moved by this idea of a Bauhaus. Is there an Asian Bauhaus movement we could talk about what design and how life should look like in this next century? And I think design can shout about that.
I completely agree. We've got a few more minutes to go, and I'm conscious that you're heading off to the Biennale.
The art one.
What are you going to be packing in your bag to read at night?
A lot of things are in the iPad these days, but I mean, if the question was, what am I reading halfway that I want to continue? So I have a lot of books of which I start on a few. So that just gives you a mentality. But I mean, the one book that I'm reading right now is actually a pretty old book. It's called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. I'm not sure whether you're familiar, but it's basically, I mean, he used to be a New York Times kind of writer, but it's really a book around outliers and how, and really trying to understand people who are outliers in the industry and why they became so great and the conditions behind it. I always find that fascinating because I've understood I'm always going to be an outlier.
The outlier. Mark Wee, Executive Director, also outlier.
That's right.
If your 21-year-old self was going to see you today, what would a 21-year-old self think of you?
I think it's probably if I was 21 looking at myself now and, in my 40s, mid-40s, let's not get to a number, but yeah. I would say that it's probably by God's grace I got here because I don't think I could have planned my career. I mean, how I got in this spot, it is not something you think about when you first are in college. Yeah. And I look at it was not a straightforward route. I sort of went through, different sort of meanderings. So I would say that I would look at it and say, wow, I mean, you couldn't have planned to where you got to. And I think I would remind myself at 21 that just stay true to your heart and just do what you feel you have life for.
I think that's a beautiful way of wrapping things up. Yeah. Mark, thank you very much for your time. How can we find you on the internet, on LinkedIn, on Twitter? How can we find you?
I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn. I mean, that's my formal sort of work one. But if you want to know more about my work as an artist, you can go to markwee.sg or you find me on Instagram, Mark Wee.
Very good.
Right.
Mark, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure, as always.
Thank you. Always. Super.